The year is 2157. For almost a century, humanity has lived with one unspoken truth: beyond the edge of our borders, beyond the fragile veil of peace, there are always eyes watching. For a time, Earth believed it had earned its peace. The scars of the first contact wars had faded, but never fully healed. Old transmissions still whispered of the Vraen, predators in the dark who once sought to test humanity's resolve. We had survived that storm, but survival was never the same as safety. And so, like a quiet sentinel in the night, the USS Defender watched. A supercarrier of unmatched design, she was more than steel and circuitry. She was patience forged into metal. Her hull carried the weight of both memory and warning: humanity would not be caught unaware again. She drifted at the edge of soul's influence, alone but never idle, listening to the emptiness of the void. It was there, in the silence, that the first ripple came. A distortion. A signal. Not the random static of stars, but the structured pulse of something alien, something moving. And then the veil tore. From hyperspace, the Vraen emerged once more. Not as raiders this time, but as an armada. An invasion force that carried the intent of conquest, not test. At the sight of them, every echo of history returned in an instant. The memory of burning cities. The helpless transmissions of colonies cut off. The long nights when humanity wondered if it would endure. The Vraen had not come to test us. They had come to erase us. But humanity had changed. The USS Defender stirred from her silence, and with her awakening came the quiet mobilization of an entire species. Orders moved across encrypted channels. Outposts lit up with urgency. Carriers, frigates, and cruisers shifted course like the steady beat of a heart preparing for war. For the first time in generations, the full human fleet began to gather. And yet, there was no bravado. No declarations shouted into the void. Humanity had learned something the galaxy had not expected: patience. Silence. Calculation. The Defender did not charge. She did not broadcast threats. She simply watched, gathering data, calculating the shape of the enemy fleet, waiting until every piece of the puzzle was known. This was humanity's strength now, not just the will to fight, but the discipline to choose when. Somewhere, in the heart of the galaxy, the Sera Empire still believed itself unchallenged. The Harari, distant and aloof, whispered of greater threats in the shadows. But here, on this border, humanity had no need for prophecy or warning. The threat was already before us, and the answer would be written in action. The Vraen thought they had returned to a species still raw from its scars. They believed the prey they once hunted had not changed. But they were wrong. Humanity was no longer prey. And so the silence deepened. The fleets took their positions. Supply lines were secured. Civilian channels were scrubbed of panic before it could take root. Even as fear spread across colonies and whispers rose of another dark age, the voice of command was calm, measured, and unbroken. Because humanity understood something the Vraen never would: fear is a weapon, but silence is sharper. The USS Defender led this silence. Her captains issued no fiery speeches. Her crew spoke in clipped tones, as though every word carried weight. And in the minds of her officers, a single thought circled like a star locked in orbit. The galaxy has forgotten what humanity is capable of. It is time to remind them. And yet, there was doubt. Would humanity endure another storm? Would this fleet, no matter how disciplined, withstand the sheer weight of an empire's wrath? Could silence and calculation truly stand against numbers, against fire, against the hunger of a species that saw us only as prey? These questions did not weaken resolve. They sharpened it. Because humanity knew the truth: there is no courage without doubt. And so, on the edge of known space, silence stretched into stillness. The USS Defender and her fleet waited as the Vraen armada advanced, the black void between them shrinking. Every second felt like the inhaling of breath before the scream. Every ship was a held note in a song that would end in fire. The universe itself seemed to hesitate. And then, the first shot was fired. Not from the Vraen. Not from humanity. But from somewhere unexpected. Because in the silence, humanity had not only been preparing weapons. It had been preparing something else. Something the galaxy was not ready to see. If you want, I can move straight into part 2, carrying the suspense into humanity's counterattack and psychological warfare. Do you want me to continue part 2 immediately, or do you want to refine part 1 with some extra flavor first, like more focus on the Harari whispers, or more detail about the Defender's crew? The first shot had not been humanity's. Nor had it been the Vraen's. It came from silence itself, a sudden burst of data, a wave of interference that rippled across the Vraen fleet. Communications shattered. Sensors flickered into blindness. Their formation, perfect in its symmetry, faltered as ships veered in confusion. And in that moment, humanity moved. The USS Defender emerged from her vigil like a predator breaking still water. With her, the fleet unfolded in disciplined precision. No war cries. No warnings. Only action. Missiles streaked into the dark. Railguns thundered without sound. Lasers carved invisible paths across the void. The Vraen, expecting a prey that would panic, instead met a predator that had already mapped their every weakness. The galaxy had forgotten this side of humanity. The patience. The cold calculation. The refusal to fight for pride, but for survival, and survival was the sharpest blade of all. The Vraen responded with fury. Beams of energy tore across the silence, cutting through human formations. Ships died in fire and static. But even in loss, the human fleet did not break. Every retreat was measured. Every sacrifice calculated. The Vraen were fighting not against emotion, but against something far worse, an enemy that had learned restraint. And restraint was terrifying. Because silence was never empty. Silence carried intent. Silence was the weight of patience before the strike. And humanity wielded it like a weapon. Across the galaxy, whispers began to spread. The Harari, watchers from the deep, felt the tremors and spoke in riddles. The architects stir, the prey sharpens itself, the cycle begins again. Their words reached no ears that understood, but their warnings joined the growing tide of unease. For the Sarah Empire, the silence was unbearable. How could a species once broken rise again in such fashion? How could Earth, forgotten and diminished, meet Empire with such quiet defiance? No proclamations. No threats. Only the unnerving calm of a predator who does not need to roar. The USS Defender embodied this calm. Her captains knew the war was not won by firepower alone. It would be won by fear, by turning silence into a shadow that haunted the Vraen. Every jamming signal. Every ghost transmission. Every sudden strike followed by disappearance. To the Vraen, it seemed as though the void itself had sided with humanity. And slowly, doubt crept into their ranks. One ship hesitated before advancing. Another overfired its weapons, as though afraid of the dark between the stars. Commanders began demanding reports that never arrived. What began as confidence began to erode into paranoia. That was humanity's true counterstrike. Not simply weapons, but psychology. Not simply fleets, but the erosion of certainty. Because the galaxy had long believed humanity fragile. That belief itself had been a weapon. And now, as the Vraen bled under the weight of silence, that belief shattered. Yet even as the tide turned, humanity did not celebrate. For in the heart of command, the whispers of the Harari gnawed like an echo. There is a greater storm than this. The architects wait. The galaxy is unprepared. Humanity could not know the full truth of these warnings. But it understood enough, the Vraen were not the end. They were merely the reminder. The reminder that silence could not last forever. And so the fleet pressed on. Battlefields stretched across the border, each encounter a rhythm of advance and retreat, silence and fire, patience and eruption. Colonies once resigned to fear began to feel hope. For the first time in living memory, humanity was not simply defending. It was dictating. The USS Defender became a symbol, not of survival, but of inevitability. A shadow that whispered across the stars, humanity has returned. And in that whisper was a question that unsettled the galaxy more than any weapon. If humanity could turn silence into victory against the Vraen, what else were they preparing for? What enemy, greater than the Vraen, greater than the Empire, did they expect to face? This sets us up perfectly for Part 3, the reveal of the deeper danger, the architects, and how humanity's silence wasn't just for this war, but for something far larger waiting beyond the galaxy's comprehension. Want me to roll straight into Part 3, or do you want me to slow down and expand Part 2 with more detail on Defender's crew interactions and Vraen reactions before we hit the final act? The war against the Vraen did not end in a blaze of triumph. It ended in silence. Not the silence of annihilation, but the silence of inevitability. Ship after ship, world after world, the Vraen fell back, not because humanity had shattered them in a single decisive strike, but because every move they made was anticipated. Every advance met with resistance. Every tactic unraveled before it could take root. The USS Defender led this orchestration like a conductor guiding a symphony of shadows. Humanity's fleets did not chase victory. They starved the Vraen of it. And in time, the predators who once prowled the galaxy came to understand, the prey had become something else entirely. Whispers spread through alien channels. The Sarah Empire watched in disbelief as its enemies faltered not before overwhelming power, but before unnerving patience. The Harari, silent witnesses to epochs of rise and ruin, spoke again in riddles, the cycle bends. The architects stir. The silence before the storm grows heavier. Most dismissed their words. Most, but not humanity. For in the quiet hours between battles, in the encrypted depths of the Defender's archives, fragments of something older had been uncovered. Signals hidden in the background noise of the cosmos. Patterns too vast to be coincidence. They spoke not of the Vraen, not of the Empire, but of something that had been here before either. The architects. No one truly knew what they were. Perhaps a civilization older than empires. Perhaps something beyond civilization itself. The Harari hinted that the architects did not build worlds, they built the rules by which worlds survived. And when those rules were broken, when a species grew too loud, too reckless, too certain of its dominion, the architects returned to rewrite the balance. And the galaxy had forgotten them. But humanity had listened. This was why silence mattered. Why patience had become a doctrine. Why the USS Defender had waited, alone, for decades at the edge of Sol. Not simply to guard against invasion, but to prepare for the greater storm the Harari had feared. The Vraen were a warning. The Empire was a distraction. The true test had yet to come. In the aftermath of battle, when the last Vraen ships fled into the void, humanity did not chase. It did not declare victory. It did not roar in triumph. The Defender sent no message of conquest, only silence. And that silence spread further than any broadcast. It became a presence. A question that unsettled every power in the galaxy. What does humanity know that we do not? For the Sarah Empire, this question was intolerable. How could a species once beneath their notice now wield such unshakable calm? What enemy were they preparing for that even the Empire dared not name? The Harari knew. In the deep councils of their people, their seers whispered, the architects will come. They always come. And this time, it will not be the galaxy's silence that greets them. It will be humanity's. Because humanity, broken once and forgotten, had learned the one truth the galaxy had ignored, survival is not won by power, but by memory. By patience. By silence. The USS Defender carried that silence like a banner. Every scar on her hull, every name etched into her decks, every crew member who stood watch without falter, they were not preparing only for the wars of today. They were preparing for the reckoning that lay beyond tomorrow. And so the galaxy whispered in fear once more. Not of the Vraen. Not of the Empire. But of humanity. Because humanity did not speak. Humanity did not boast. Humanity only watched. Humanity only waited. And in the waiting, the architects began to stir. This closes the trilogy with a philosophical, ominous wait, showing that Earth's silence wasn't just about the Vraen, it was about preparing for the architects, a hidden, ancient threat.